Let go of my Father, and the Virgin Mary will make you walk again. The thin little voice of the 7-year-old girl cut through the courtroom like a bolt of lightning. For a second, no one breathed. Then laughter, as if everyone had agreed beforehand. They laughed at the light blue dress, the worn-out shoes, and the absurd idea that a child could challenge the most feared judge in Texas. But Michael Harrison did not laugh. Not because he believed, but because for the first time in 15 years, he hesitated. This is a story about faith, justice, and the unexplainable power that only a pure child can awaken, a story that forever changed the lives of everyone who was present on that extraordinary day. Before we continue, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I would love to see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. On that gray morning in Texas, the courtroom felt like a cathedral of despair. At the center of it all, Judge Michael Harrison, motionless in his wheelchair, with the steel gaze of someone who no longer knows mercy. They called him the Iron Judge. No one dared laugh in his presence. But it hadn't always been this way. 15 years earlier, he ran marathons. He played basketball with his friends. He believed that justice and compassion could walk hand in hand. Until the rainy night when his car skidded on the highway. He survived, but lost the movement of his legs forever, and little by little he lost his soul as well. Sarah tried to remain by his side. 2 years of silent struggle. But the man she loved had vanished, swallowed by his own bitterness. The divorce came in 2011. Sarah moved to another state, taking with her the last traces of Michael's humanity. Alone in an apartment without photos or happy memories, surrounded only by law books and a mechanical routine, he became the most feared judge in Texas. In 15 years, he sentenced more than 1,000 people. His rate of maximum sentences, 89%. For him, the law was clear, cold, and absolute. Emotional appeals did not move him. Mitigating circumstances did not interest him. The staff respected him, but they also feared him. Experienced lawyers did everything they could to avoid having their cases land in his court. Relatives of defendants wept upon hearing his name. Michael had built a fortress of ice around his heart, and nothing, not anyone, could break through it. In a small town in Texas, there lived a family that would soon cross paths with Judge Harrison's destiny. Robert Thompson, 45 years old, had been a gardener for over 20 years. A man of few words and calloused hands, he worked before dawn and returned when the sun was already bidding farewell. A widower for 3 years, he raised his daughter Emma alone, a 7-year-old girl with dark, attentive eyes that seemed to hold more wisdom than her age would allow. Since her mother's death, the two had been inseparable. The modest house was always filled with drawings taped to the walls and photos pinned to the refrigerator. In Emma's room, on the small shelf beside her bed, there was an image of the Virgin Mary that had belonged to her mother. Before leaving this world, Linda had made Robert promise he would raise their daughter in faith. Every night, Emma knelt beside her bed and prayed the rosary she had inherited from her mother. The worn beads slipped through her small fingers as she asked for protection for her father and for anyone in the world who might be suffering. For Emma, the Virgin Mary was not just an image. She was a present, loving mother, always ready to listen. Life was not easy, but it was full of love. Robert supported the household with hard work, but he never let affection, presence, and attention be lacking. The community respected him as an honest and tireless man, always willing to help a neighbor in need. Emma was also cherished by everyone. At school, her teachers praised her kindness and intelligence. She was one of the best students in the class, but she never boasted about it. On the contrary, she helped classmates who struggled, always with a smile and words of encouragement. It was a simple family, but they were rich in character, in faith, and in hope. But in December of 2022, their peaceful lives were shattered by an accusation that would change everything forever. It was a cold December morning when the Thompson family's life was turned upside down. Robert was in the backyard preparing his tools for another day of work when 2 police cars stopped in front of the house. Emma, getting ready for school, ran to the window. "Robert Thompson?" asked the detective, tall and expressionless. "Yes, that's me. You are under arrest for the jewelry store robbery that occurred on the night of December 15th. You have the right to remain silent." Robert froze. Robbery? He had never taken anything from anyone, not even a piece of candy from a store as a child. "There must be some mistake. I didn't do this." "Tell that to the judge," replied the detective as he handcuffed his wrists. Emma ran to the door, crying. "Daddy." "It's going to be okay, Princess," he said, forcing a smile. "Daddy didn't do anything wrong, but nothing would be okay any time soon." The neighbor, Mrs. Williams, held Emma as the cars drove away with the only family the girl had left in the world. Hours later, the details came to light. The jewelry store had been robbed a few days earlier. The cameras showed a man resembling Robert. Witnesses reported seeing a man matching Robert's description in the area at the time. Cell phone records placed him near the scene. And in the trunk of his truck, police claimed to have found one of the stolen jewels. And the most damning evidence, one of the stolen jewels had been found in the trunk of his truck during the police search. To an outsider, the case looked solid. To those who knew him, it was absurd. Robert Thompson had never stolen anything. He was a man of principles who had taught his daughter that it was better to endure hardship than to take what did not belong to her. James Mitchell, a public defender, took on the case. He was experienced but overworked, with few resources and dozens of cases piled on his desk. When he visited Robert in prison, he found a broken man. "I swear on my wife's memory," Robert said, his voice trembling. "I didn't do this. My daughter has already lost her mother. She can't lose her father, too." Mitchell believed him, but he knew that proving innocence was far more difficult than proving guilt, especially with such perfect evidence. And there was one last problem. The case would be judged by Michael Harrison, the judge who never showed mercy. While Robert languished in pretrial detention, Emma lived through a nightmare that no 7-year-old child should ever know. Mrs. Williams took her in temporarily, but the little girl cried every night, asking for her father. At school, she couldn't concentrate. The teachers tried to comfort her. In vain. Every night, kneeling beside the borrowed bed, Emma held her mother's rosary and whispered, "Virgin Mary, you know that my daddy didn't do this. Please help people see the truth." She wasn't asking only for her father's release. She also prayed for the judge, even without knowing who he was. "Virgin Mary," she continued her nightly pleas, "if the judge's heart is closed, please open it. If he is sad, comfort him. If he cannot see the truth, enlighten his eyes." Meanwhile, defense attorney James Mitchell did everything he could. He questioned evidence, searched for flaws, tried to buy time. But he knew it would be nearly impossible to defeat prosecutor David Chen, known for his coldness and hunger for victories. Chen treated every trial as a personal battle. For him, the truth did not matter, only victory. On the eve of the trial, Emma could not sleep. She spent hours on her knees, praying with such intensity that even Mrs. Williams was shaken. "My dear, you need to rest," said the elderly neighbor. Then Emma looked at the woman with her big, serious eyes. "Do you believe in miracles?" The old lady hesitated, and then whispered, "Yes, dear. I believe the Virgin Mary can perform miracles, and perhaps a miracle from the Virgin Mary is exactly what will save your father." Emma smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then I will ask for a miracle. I will ask Our Lady to reveal the truth." And she made a silent promise. "Virgin Mary, if you save my daddy, I will spend my entire life speaking of your love." The courtroom was more crowded than usual on that March morning. The story of the gardener accused of robbing a jewelry store had caught the attention of the local media. Journalists occupied the back rows, cameras discreetly positioned, ready to capture yet another conviction from the famous Iron Judge. Emma arrived hand in hand with Mrs. Williams, wearing her best dress, light blue like the mantle of the Virgin Mary. In her school backpack she carried her mother's rosary and a small image of Our Lady. When she saw her father being brought in by the guards, Emma tried to run toward him, but was gently restrained by Mrs. Williams. Robert looked at his daughter with a sad smile, trying to convey strength, even though he was shattered inside. Judge Michael Harrison entered in his wheelchair with the expression everyone knew: cold, calculating, impassive. His eyes scanned the crowded room without showing any emotion. To him, this was just another case, just another morning at work. But when his gaze briefly passed over Emma, something strange happened. For a nearly imperceptible second, he felt a tightness in his chest that he could not explain. The little girl was watching him with intense eyes, not with fear or anger, but with something that seemed like hope. Prosecutor Chen presented the case brilliantly and mercilessly. The evidence was laid out methodically: the images from the security cameras, the testimonies of the witnesses, the records placing Robert in the area of the crime, and above all, the jewel found in his truck. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Chen said with a theatrical voice, "the evidence is irrefutable. Robert Thompson is guilty of aggravated robbery and must pay the maximum price." When Chen finished his presentation, a heavy certainty hung in the air that Robert would be convicted. The evidence seemed far too solid to be contested. James Mitchell did the best he could in the defense. He questioned the quality of the camera footage, the credibility of the witnesses, tried to create reasonable doubt about how the jewel ended up in Robert's truck. He presented character testimonies, showed that Robert had never been arrested before, highlighted his reputation in the community. But his words sounded weak against the weight of the evidence presented by the prosecution. Mitchell knew he was losing the case, and by the icy look of Judge Harrison, he knew there would be no mercy. Then came the most crucial moment: the final statements and the sentencing. Chen gave his closing argument, confident in victory. Mitchell attempted one last emotional appeal, speaking about Emma, about the broken family, about the importance of being absolutely certain before separating a father from his daughter. But his words echoed into the emptiness of the cold courtroom. Judge Michael Harrison adjusted his glasses and picked up the papers. His voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. "Robert Thompson, after careful analysis of the evidence presented, this court finds that..." It was exactly at that moment that something extraordinary happened. "Wait!" A thin but determined voice echoed through the courtroom, interrupting the judge at the most solemn moment of the trial. Everyone turned, surprised. Emma Thompson was standing, stepping out from the row where she had been sitting in silence. "Mrs." Williams tried to hold her back, but the girl was already walking toward the center of the courtroom with small yet firm steps. A murmur swept through the room. Judge Harrison frowned, clearly irritated by the unprecedented interruption. Emma stopped right in front of the raised podium, where the judge observed her with growing impatience. Even at 7 years old, she understood the gravity of the moment. She knew she was challenging the most powerful man in that room. "I am Robert Thompson's daughter," she said in a clear voice that surprised everyone with its firmness, "and I need to speak before you make a terrible mistake." Judge Harrison leaned slightly forward, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Child," he answered with calculated coldness, "this is a court of law, not a place for—" "I know what justice is," Emma interrupted, causing a shock throughout the courtroom. A 7-year-old child had just cut off the most feared judge in Texas. "My mother taught me before she went to heaven. Justice is when the truth comes out, even when it is hidden." For a moment that felt eternal, Michael Harrison remained silent. There was something in that child's determination that intrigued him against his will. It was a pure courage he had not seen in years. "You have 1 minute," he finally said, more out of curiosity than compassion. Emma took a deep breath and did something no one present would ever forget. She opened her school backpack and carefully pulled out her mother's rosary. Beads worn by time, yet still shining with the faith of generations. She held the rosary in her small hands and looked directly into Judge Harrison's eyes. "Your Honor," she said in a trembling but unwavering voice, "my daddy didn't do what they say he did, and the Virgin Mary will prove it." Laughter began to echo through the room, at first discreet, then louder. Some people whispered sarcastic remarks. Prosecutor Chen himself smiled with evident disdain. "Poor child," someone in the gallery muttered, completely desperate. But Emma was unfazed by the mockery. She raised her voice above the growing noise. "If you let my daddy go, the Virgin Mary will make you walk again." The room literally exploded. Cruel laughter bounced off the marble walls. Malicious comments multiplied. Some even applauded the girl's performance mockingly. "She's lost her mind completely," someone shouted. "How ridiculous," another remarked. "Somebody get this child out of here," a woman demanded with scorn. Judge Harrison struck the gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, but he himself was visibly disturbed by the girl's boldness. But Emma Thompson, only 7 years old, wearing her blue dress and holding her worn rosary beads, did not flinch. She knelt right there in the middle of the courtroom before hundreds of people mocking her and began to pray out loud. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." Her voice cut through the laughter like a blade of pure faith. Some laughed even louder, but others gradually fell silent, touched by something inexplicable in that scene. "Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus." Emma continued praying, silent tears streaming down her face, yet her voice remained firm. It was a vision that reached even the hardest of hearts, a child, innocent, kneeling in a cold courtroom, pleading for justice through prayer. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen." And it was precisely at that moment that something completely impossible began to happen. While Emma kept praying, completely ignoring the jeers around her, Michael Harrison began to feel something he hadn't felt in 15 years. At first, it was just a faint tingling in his right leg, so subtle that he initially thought it was nothing but psychological suggestion, perhaps some strange, emotional reaction to that bizarre scene. But the tingling grew stronger. It turned into a warm, living sensation that climbed up his calf like tiny waves of electricity. It was something he had not felt since the fateful accident of 2008. Michael gripped the arms of his wheelchair, his knuckles turning white. His heart began to race. "This isn't possible," he thought desperately. "It's psychological, just mental suggestion." Yet the sensation intensified. It was as if something long dormant for a decade and a half was trying to awaken. Dead nerves pulsing with new life. Forgotten muscles receiving impossible signals. Emma finished her first Hail Mary and began the second, completely unaware of the impact her words were having on the judge. Her faith was so pure, so absolute, that it seemed to create an invisible field of energy around her. Hail Mary, full of grace. Michael tried to move his toes. For one terrifying and wondrous second, he felt them respond. Only for a moment, but it was real. 15 years of total paralysis, and now this. His breathing grew difficult. Cold sweat began to trickle down his forehead. The courtroom remained in chaos, people laughing and shouting, but he no longer heard anything except the girl's voice praying. "Blessed art thou among women." The sensation in his legs intensified further. It was as if electric current ran through dead nerves, awakening atrophied muscles, restoring connections long thought lost. Michael tried to hide what was happening. He gripped the arms of the chair tighter, forcing himself to keep the impassive expression everyone knew. But inside, he was in total panic. "This cannot be happening," he repeated to himself. "Spinal cord injuries are irreversible. The doctors were clear." Emma continued praying, now on her third Hail Mary. Her words flowed with a faith that could move mountains, an absolute certainty that the Virgin Mary was hearing every syllable. And then it happened. For approximately 5 eternal seconds, Michael Harrison felt his legs completely, not just tingling or vague sensations, but full control. His muscles responded to the commands of his brain. His feet pressed against the footrest of the chair. For 5 miraculous seconds, Judge Michael Harrison felt his legs. Michael Harrison let out a muffled cry and bent forward in the wheelchair, his hands trembling. The entire courtroom stopped. The laughter ceased instantly. Every eye turned toward the most feared judge in Texas. "Your Honor?" asked the clerk, worried. Emma stopped praying and looked at him with her wide eyes, full of hope. Michael tried to regain his composure, but his hands kept trembling. The sensation had vanished, but the memory of those 5 seconds burned in every fiber of his being. With a hoarse and almost inaudible voice, he murmured, "This session is adjourned indefinitely." The gavel slipped from his hands. 3 hours later, Michael was in the office of the neurologist who had been following him for 15 years. "I need new tests, now," said Michael urgently. "Oh, Michael, you just had complete tests 6 months ago. Everything is the same, as always." "No," he interrupted, slamming his fist on the desk. "Something happened today." I felt my legs. For a few seconds I felt them completely. The doctor stared at him with concern. "It could be stress. Sometimes the mind creates sensations." It wasn't imagination. Michael's voice came out firm. I moved my feet. I felt my toes pressing against the footrest of the chair. "All right," said the doctor, grabbing his agenda. "MRI tomorrow. Let's see." Michael left more confused than when he had entered. While Michael dealt with his own crisis, an investigator decided to review the case of Robert Thompson. How could a man with no record, known for his honesty, do something like this? She murmured to herself. The camera footage was poor. The suspect looked like Robert, but she knew how deceiving appearances could be. She discovered that he had worked in 3 nearby houses that same week. He had a legitimate reason to be in the area. But the most important discovery was yet to come. A man named Mark Stevens, who looked very much like Robert, had been arrested a week before the robbery and released 2 days earlier, with bail paid by an office that no one could locate. She obtained authorization to inspect Robert's truck. The trunk lock had been forced, something ignored in the original report. "Someone placed this jewel here afterward," she concluded. By tracing who had access to the evidence, she arrived at a name, the young assistant to the prosecutor, in debt, a childhood friend of Mark Stevens, and desperate to impress his boss. When confronted, he broke down. "I just wanted to help Mark," he cried. "I thought no one would ever find out." He had planted the jewel in the truck, tampered with documents, fabricated evidence. The prosecutor never knew. He had been deceived like everyone else. The confession was sent directly to Judge Michael Harrison. Meanwhile, Michael Harrison was in the hospital, undergoing complete neurological exams. "The results are surprising," said Dr. Foster, analyzing the images on the screen with a look of astonishment. "What do you mean?" "Michael, there's something I don't understand. Your spinal injury is still present, but there are signs of neurological activity that did not exist before." Michael felt his heart race. "What does that mean?" "It means that some of your nerves are showing signs of regeneration, very slight, but detectable. It's extraordinary." "Is it possible I could walk again?" Dr. Foster hesitated. It's still far too early to know, but I can say there is a real possibility. Michael left the hospital with a mixture of hope and fear he had not felt in decades. When the trial resumed, the courtroom was packed. The investigator presented everything: the assistant's confession, the identification of the true culprit, the proof that the jewel had been planted. Michael Harrison, still processing his own medical exams, declared, "After a complete review of the evidence, this court declares Robert Thompson innocent of all charges. Mr. Thompson is free to go." The moment when father and daughter were reunited was moving. Emma ran into her father's arms. "Daddy, I knew everything would turn out right." Robert held her tightly. Michael Harrison watched the scene, still in his wheelchair but feeling something different stirring inside him. 3 months later, the Iron Judge had disappeared. In his place, a man had emerged who finally balanced justice with compassion. And the sensations in his legs kept growing. Month after month, the tests showed small improvements. "It's a unique case," said the doctor. "I can't explain it, but your nerves are regenerating." 6 months later. It was an ordinary Thursday when Michael woke up feeling something different. They were no longer occasional tinglings. It was control. During breakfast, he tried to move his toes. They responded completely. Michael grabbed the edges of the table and, for the first time in 15 years, tried to stand up. His legs, weak but functional, supported him. Michael Harrison was standing. He took a careful step, then another and another. After 15 years, Michael Harrison was walking. 2 hours later, Michael was at the Thompsons' doorstep. When Robert opened the door and saw him standing, leaning on a cane but clearly walking, he was speechless. "Emma!" he shouted. "Come here!" Emma appeared, saw Michael standing, and smiled with genuine joy. "Mr. Michael, how wonderful!" She hugged him warmly. "Emma," he said, deeply moved, "thank you for helping me find my heart again." "You did that yourself," she replied. "You just needed to remember it was still there." And so, that little girl of only 7 years old forever changed the destiny of a judge and of everyone who witnessed that day. Because what happened there cannot be explained merely by laws, by logic, or by science. It was a miracle. A miracle of the Virgin Mary, born from the pure faith of a child who dared to believe when everyone else laughed. And perhaps that is the greatest power of miracles. They happen when someone kneels with their whole heart, even if the entire world doubts. May the same love of the Virgin Mary that restored hope to Michael Harrison also reach your life. May she touch the pains no one sees, heal the wounds no one understands, and cause to bloom again what seemed lost forever. Because the miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen. And the next one may happen to you if you open your heart to the intercession of the Virgin Mary. If this story strengthened your faith, subscribe now to the channel to follow more testimonies and miracles of the Virgin Mary. And in the comments, write with faith, "Virgin Mary, intercede for us." Thus, together, we will form a great chain of prayer and hope.